With a message from God's Word, here's Charles Stanley.
Well, we're in the Gospel of John, so if you'll turn to the 11th chapter, that's the account of the raising of Lazarus from the dead. But I want to title this God's Higher Purpose, because usually people read this passage and the only thing they see is that Lazarus died and God raised him from the dead, or Christ raised him from the dead. But I want us to see this, how it applies to our own individual lives, because if you only see that truth, you'll miss a great, great truth in this passage. So let's read a little ways, and then we'll get started, and we'll move on as far as we can get here. And you'll recall, according to chapter 10, that Jesus was down by the Jordan, and verse 1 of chapter 11 says, "Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha." And it's interesting that John didn't say Bethany, the home of Lazarus. He said the village of Mary and her sister Martha. What would that indicate to us about those two gals? When John wrote this, what would it indicate to us if John writing this gospel, when he identifies Bethany as the village of Mary and Martha, what would that say to us about those two women? All right, they're important. What else? What's that? Okay, people, in other words, these two, folks knew who these two girls were. The village of Mary and Martha, oh, that's over in Bethany, which is about 5 miles or so away, or a couple of miles away. And it was the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Isn't that interesting? Lazarus is not the most, well, look over here in chapter 12 for a moment, because it's in the next chapter that John tells us about this. Verse 3, "Mary therefore took a pound of very costly, genuine spikenard ointment, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the ointment. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples who was intending to betray him, said, 'Oh, you should have given that to the poor.'" Now, doesn't that sound like a first-class hypocrite? "Oh, you poured that on his feet. You should have given that to the poor." Now, who was the poor according to Judas? Himself. Now, he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but what? Because he was a what? Thief. And in the Greek, that he was is imperfect tense, which means that was his lifestyle. He'd been a thief all along. So he didn't just all of a sudden get real sanctimonious about ointment. All right. Verse 3, "The sisters therefore sent to Jesus, saying, 'Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick.'" It's interesting how many times it's phrased that way. "But when Jesus heard it, he said, 'This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified by it.'" Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Isn't it interesting? He puts him last. "When therefore he heard that he was sick, he stayed there 2 days longer." How would you like to be treated that way? He stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you. Are you going there again?" So they weren't too excited about getting in on this little trip. Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light's not in him." Then he said, and after that, he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go that I may awaken him out of sleep." The disciples therefore said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll wake up." Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he was speaking of literal sleep. Then Jesus therefore said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas therefore, who is called Didymus, that's a Greek word for it, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go that we may die with him." And they were convinced that if he goes back, they're going to stone him to death. So when Jesus came, he found that he'd already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Martha, therefore, when she heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him, but Mary still sat in the house. Now, if you recall in Luke 10, who's the busybody around Martha and Mary's house? Martha. She's the first one out to meet him. Martha therefore said to Jesus, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give it to you. Jesus said to her, your brother shall rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me shall live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this, Martha? She said to him, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. She still had a little problem believing, but I'm going to show you in a few moments. When she'd said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, the teacher's here and he's calling for you. And when she heard it, she arose quickly and was coming to him. Now, Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha met him. The Jews then, who were with her in the house and consoling her, when they saw that Mary rose up quickly and went out, followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. The question is, what was he troubled about? And said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. The shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. And so the Jews were saying, behold how he loved him. But some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of him who was blind have kept this man also from dying? Jesus, therefore, again being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, remove the stone. Now look at Martha. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he's been dead 4 days. Now if she'd had absolute, full, total faith about it, she probably wouldn't have said that. Not being critical of her, she's just having a little problem, just like you and I would have. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you, if you believe, you'll see the glory of God? So they removed the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, and listen to this, this is just great. Father, I thank thee that you've heard me. What kind of faith is that? Wavering faith? Great faith? What is it? Perfect faith. It's already been done in the eyes of Jesus. You've already heard me. And I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people standing around, I said it, that they may believe that you did send me. That is, he didn't have to pray that prayer out loud. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Now listen, suppose Jesus had not said, Lazarus, come forth, what would have happened? Everybody who'd ever died would have come forth, wouldn't it? Lazarus, come forth. He who had died came forth bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Or loose him and let him go.